is that you've already seen a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about, so I can kind of slip through and get to the questions a little bit quicker. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the Commercial Crew and Cargo the program. So it's, talk a little bit about SpaceX, a little bit about Orbital, the two unfunded Space Act partnerships we have, and just briefly, there was some discussion in the hallway discussion here on the Recovery Act type stuff. So we can't talk much about it, so I thought I'd just head off some questions right up front during this presentation. First, I want to talk just a little bit about the national direction itself. If you go back to the Space Act, the 1958, as amended in 1984, there are a couple key things that were pulled out. Seek and encourage to the maximum extent possible for the fullest commercial use of space. The National Space Policy, the 2004, talked about commercial participation in exploration to further science. Also talked about commercial opportunities to provide transportation, other surfaces to the International Space Station. And I'll talk about that in a little more detail. The Authorization Act of 2005 shall establish a program to develop sustained human presence on the moon to provide and really to promote exploration, science, and commerce. So you start seeing the theme going forward. The Authorization Act of 2008, again, to the maximum extent practical, make the use of the commercial sector to provide these services. And when I get into the COTS program itself, you'll see that that's what this was morphed around and wrapped around. Well, in 2005, to start implementing these type of activities, NASA established the Crew and Cargo program, really to implement some of the U.S. exploration policies that I described earlier, facilitate the private industry, and create a market environment. At the earlier panel, they talked about not just having one commercial provider, but multiple providers. Competition is great. A little bit about the budget that was set up. So in 2005, NASA established a $500 million budget, or budgeted $500 million, between 2006 and 2010 as an investment for the demonstration of commercial orbit transportation capabilities. We approached it in two phases. The first phase was really the technology demonstration phase, and then phase two is what we called the CRS, or the commercial resupply service, and that was a competitive bid activity. And the commercial resupply service then is from NASA, is led by our Space Ops SOMD mission directorate. So phase one, the first round, was competitively, was a competition for the Space Act agreements that we talked about earlier this morning. It was awarded $278 million to SpaceX and also $208 million to Rocket Plane Kistler. That contract was later terminated because of failure to meet some milestones. And for those of you that aren't aware of how the Space Act agreement really works, is the companies have to meet a milestone prior to getting paid, and it goes forward that way. And that was talked a little bit. I think Max had talked about that. Where are you, Max? Had mentioned that in the first panel. So then in phase one, we had a second round competition that was awarded in February 2008 to Orbital Sciences, and that was for $170 million. Phase two, and if you start thinking about how do we energize the commercial environment prior to any of these really demonstrations, we went out with the phase two procurement, the CRS, and made two awards in December 2008. SpaceX to $1.6 billion and Orbital $1.9 billion for ISS cargo services. Now again, we need to get through the first phases and demonstration before we can really exercise the CRS contract. But from a government standpoint, you can see that we're leaning forward. It's the walk or the crawl, walk, run approach. So we have to get through these critical milestones before we move forward too far. The original Space Act agreements that were set up were really set up in four phases, what we call, or I shouldn't say four phases, four different capabilities, right? So capability A was the external cargo delivery and disposal. So this is unpressurized cargo, goes up and disposes. It's not a return. Capability B was internal cargo delivery and disposal, so this was pressurized cargo. Capability C was internal cargo delivery and return, so that's actually taking cargo to the station and bringing cargo back and returning. Capability D was actually the crew transportation portion of it, so taking crew to station, bringing them home. Capability A, B, and C were funded. Capability D today is not funded, has not been funded, we've not been given funds for Capability D. Again, taking the crawl, walk, run approach, we need to get through some of these other capabilities before you really exercise the human transportation portion. SpaceX, the COTS system, and Max talked about it in detail, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but it's the Falcon 9 medium-class launch vehicle, the Dragon module, recoverable launch vehicle, launched off of Pad 40 at, in Florida. And for this, as I mentioned earlier, NASA's investment was $278 million, and we're still going through the milestones. Capability D, or the cargo crew demonstration, which is not funded, was a $308 million activity. Again, that's not funded. Orbital science, also with the cargo demonstrations, $170 million activity. Launching off the, using the TARS 2, and the engines, Frank did an excellent job describing what the engines were, so I won't go into repeating the engines. The one thing to note is, we talk about demonstrations, in this case, March of 2011 for Orbital, 2010 for SpaceX. As we're going through, those are just the dates that are in the Space Act agreements. As we're going through looking at different milestones, those dates may, could shift. And again, it's, as we hit the milestones or get further into development, they may shift. But those are the dates that on the existing Space Act agreements. We also have two unfunded Space Act agreements. One's with Planet Space and the other is with Space Dev. And so here's a case of, the companies unfunded working with NASA to say, okay, if we can go to this direction, what do you think? One other key thing that is part of these Space Act agreements is NASA has set up what we call advisory teams of roughly 100 available at 100 different expertises. As problems arise, that these experts are available to the COTS companies, and it's been used multiple times. And I think if you would talk to Orbital or SpaceX, as well as the unfunded ones, they'd say this has been a really good model. So let me talk just a little bit about the recovery investment. There was $400 million allocated to exploration. $150 million was what we've looked at for commercial crew cargo. And I want to point here that right now, this was what, in negotiation with the administration, is what went forward to the Senate and House committees on appropriations. So I really don't want to get into any more detail as they're making their, as they're working through making their decisions. From a NASA standpoint, we aren't the policymakers, we're the implementers. So whatever they work out is what we will then implement. A key thing, and I would encourage you to go to the recovery website to look at a little bit more detail, but a key thing here is this also benefits both NASA and the commercial entities. So if you look at things like human rating, and that was talked about in the first panel, getting a set of human rating requirements that are easy to look at that both the commercial entities as well as the government can look at to where we're really cutting out what are things that aren't needed for the bare minimum, or what are the things that this will help improve the reliability or help improve your crew safety, but it's not, it becomes almost in the comfort zone. Other things that was brought up in the first panel, well, docking station. Well, how do you dock to station? So one of the items is working on a common docking mechanism. That helps NASA as well as the commercial entities. So that's all I'd want to talk about on this. And so if there are questions that come up, I would really appreciate the sensitivities, again, as that is with the Senate and House, or with Congress, the Senate and House appropriations committees. This briefing, and I should have started off earlier, was the briefing that Doug Cook briefed yesterday to the Augustine panel. And the timing is, you know, is